Oh my, she's getting game ended? Oh, I don't have my...
Fucking get a clip of that with the car, with the and put over an overlay of a car.
Hello and welcome to the Warframe tier list. Today we'll be going over Hydroid, and first things first, let's go into the builds. Very quickly, we're going to go over the abilities. So his first ability is Tempest Barrage. This ability is actually not as bad as a lot of people make it out to be. This ability is an okay CC. It's definitely not good, but it's not terrible. It's just slightly below average. However, it has the benefit of stripping nullifiers of their bubble, and when using the augment for it, applying 10 stacks of corrosive very quickly, as you are allowed to have multiple Tempest Barrages down at once. His second ability is where you dash across the floor as a puddle. This ability is actually not too bad either, as you can spam it, and as you're casting it, you're invincible. And if you choose to use the augment for it, you also get pure status immunity for a duration after casting, which is really nice. It also frees up your Exilus slot at the cost of a main slot build. The third ability is where you just completely turn into a puddle and do nothing. This does make you invincible, however you can't really do anything when you're inside of it. Yes, you can cast his abilities, but in reality you just can't really do anything. So this ability is pretty bad, and it's what you should be subsuming over almost all the time. His final ability is what most people use him for, which is where you spawn a bunch of tentacles and it CCs enemies, and with Pilfering Swarm, enemies drop more loot, which is nice to keep your life support up and to keep your ammo up and energy and all that good stuff. Now as for the builds themselves, the first build is just a cookie cutter Breach Surge build using Equilibrium to sustain, and Pilfering Swarm, because if you're not using this, there's really no point in playing Hydroid, I'll be blunt. And Corroding Barrage for soft armor stripping the enemies. It's not too great, but it's better than nothing. And Natural Talent to speed up the charge time of Tempest Barrage and Tentacle Swarm. The second build is just a Nourish build, and I preferred the Breach Surge build. Now, as for the rest of the kit, primary is your AoE weapon of choice. I was using the Brahma, as the Brahma is the best AoE weapon. However, Hydroid does strip 80% of their armor, so you can use other AoE weapons, but it does not scale that well, so I do suggest using the Brahma. But if you just absolutely hate it, as do I, then feel free to use anything else. Secondary is your primer of choice, or something like a Nucor to purge nullifiers of their shield if your one is not playing nice. Melee weapon is Praetos or Enidem if for passive movement speed, or just a Glaive if you want a large AoE nuke, or whatever other whatever other melee weapon that you happen to like. Focus School is of course Madurai for mainly the 50% casting speed, and the 40% ability strength is just a bit of a side benefit, but you mainly want it for the 50% casting speed, again for his first ability and Tentacle Swarm. The final part of the build is just the Panzer, which is just a standard Panzer build. What's cringe is that there's like this long delay between one cast. If I could just double cast the one or infinitely cast the one, it would be completely fine as well.
Yeah, like he's peak early. Like I genuinely think like if it's like a simple like buff to those abilities would actually be 10 times better.
Now moving on to the rankings, we were discussing Hydroid in relation to 4 separate topics. Firstly, his KPM, secondly, his survivability, thirdly, his viability, and finally, how fun he is to play. All of this data is sampled from a 1-hour solo Steel Path bot run with no specters and no on-call. The first topic, Hydroid's KPM, and I'll be pretty blunt here, it's not too great. Yes, he's just a gun frame, however, you are going to be using his 1, which is staggering enemies a lot, lowering your KPM, and then you're also going to be using his 4, Again, CCing enemies in a large radius, flinging them everywhere, again, lowering your KPM. The other issue is he doesn't really have anything that really helps his KPM in any way. Everything just negatively impacts his KPM. This doesn't entirely matter per se though, as his 4 generates enough loot to where you should be fine with life support and energy and ammo and all that other stuff, even with a lower KPM. But the KPM does suffer, especially if you're using Nourish and not Breach Surge. Because another problem is most of the time that you're playing Hydroid, you're going to be cramped up in a corner or at the end of a hallway or something because he really struggles to stay alive if you're not doing something like that. So you're kind of just praying to the Warframe gods that you get a good room layout, and at the end of your hallway or wherever you're deciding to hold out, you get good spawns for your KPM. So on top of it just being mediocre in the first place, it's also very reliant on a good tile set. Not only that, you don't really have a good way to scale with Hydroid, and the only scaling that you have is an 80% armor strip, which really isn't that great. So for all of these reasons, I'm going to give Hydroid a B- for his KPM. Now moving on to the second topic is survivability, and you might have heard I already briefly mentioned on it. So his survivability also isn't great. You can get stuck and animate, well not stuck in animations, but you can get caught while you're charging up your 1, or you can get caught while you're charging up your 4, and it can lead to your death very, very easily, especially if it's your 1. Your 1 does not reset your shield gate unless you fully recharge it. So if your shield gate gets broken and you just started charging your 1, you either have to hold out and fully charge it, or you just let go and immediately press Breach Surge or Nourish, and there's a chance that you die in between those two casts, as a half-charged 1 does not reset your shield gate, so you will not get immunity. His 2 gives him some survivability, but again, you can get caught in a loop where you're just sitting there spamming the 2 over and over and over and over and over again, not really accomplishing anything, and then your situation just gets worse and worse as more enemies stack up. And then you might be thinking, well, you said earlier that his 1 and 4 are both CC tools. Yes, I did, but I also said that they aren't great CC tools, and even if they were, the unfortunate reality is frames that rely on CC to survive are pretty mediocre now ever since the Eximus rework, especially in a place like Mott where there are ancient healers giving even non-Eximus units overguard. So combined with a bad KPM, his low survivability gets amplified into being even worse because there's going to be more enemies than normal on screen, just because you're not killing all of them, you're not grouping them, you don't have a damage amplifier, you're not stripping them, so you're not killing them in as big of a radius. So you just have no survivability tools other than 2 mediocre CC abilities, with also being able to get caught while charging abilities. So it just leads to a bad survivability, and then you may be thinking, oh, you can go a health tank build, and the problem with that is you don't really have the mod space to make a good health tank build that can actually survive in a Mott run as Hydroid. And if you do, then the rest of your kit will be doing absolutely nothing because you sacrificed every single mod slot. So then you're basically just a worse Inaros at that point. I really don't want to harp on too much about this, so I'm just going to say Hydroid survivability is a C-. Now moving on to viability, and again, it really doesn't help him here. So Hydroid doesn't excel anywhere at all in the entire game, and in fact, he is well below average everywhere in the entire game, except for one specific thing, which is Silver Grove Specters for farming Growing Power, Empowered Blades, Briefer Spite, and all of that stuff. He is the absolute best frame to do that, as he is the only person that doubles it, other than Nekros. But outside of that, he has nothing, And you might be thinking, oh, well, he's a loot frame, he can't be that bad. The problem is he is by far the worst loot frame, and he's very situational for the enemies to even drop additional loot. So if you're going to play a loot frame, honestly, you're probably better off just using a bunch of nuke frames. You'll get more loot than having a Hydroid and trying to use that. Like, it's not great. So for his viability, I'll give him a D minus just for mainly being Silver Grove, like the Silver Grove farm, but I will toss him a very tiny bone for the fact that he is a loot frame and go D minus instead of an F rank. Now, as for his fun, this is again where nothing really helps him. So he's very clunky in the sense that you have to charge up his one every cast. Like, you don't have to, but the duration on his one is so stupidly low that you really want to charge it, or else it will just run out like instantly. And it has an annoying delay in between casts, so you can't just spam it out either. So you're heavily incentivized to charge it, but then that's just clunky gameplay, and like I mentioned earlier in survivability, it can lead to you dying, so it's just annoying. Yes, he kind of has like the Ureli effect, where he's so bad that it could be funny, but the main difference is Ureli was kind of funny because she wasn't actually that bad. She at least did something, right? But Hydroid really doesn't do anything at all, so it just stays not funny. Like, you're just not having a good time. You're just sitting there suffering, trying not to die. It's like sweaty gameplay, but then you look at your KPM and it's just like not good. So you're sitting there sweating just to survive and all for nothing. So for all of these reasons, I'm going to give his fun rank an F. In conclusion, Hydroid is a D tier Warframe who could definitely use a buff and or a rework. Just some small things that I've noticed from playing him is his one should really go back to being a full strip, as it used to full strip back when having 10 corrosive procs would full strip. On top of that, if his one would just always be fully charged and you didn't actually have to charge it, that would go a long way. Both of these two changes combined would actually make Hydroid a decent frame, especially if they did anything else at all to the other abilities to make them better. He could go from one of the worst, if not the worst frame in the entire game, to actually an average to an above average Warframe very easily, and I really hope that one day he gets some changes.